Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Our presentation is titled Visual Translation and Language Access in North Central Florida.
Hello everyone, my name is Laura Valentina Nino.
And my name is Laura Gonzales. We're both at the University of Florida. So in our presentation, we're threading together conversations in technical communication, in design, and in translation. And these fields have been and continue to be interconnected for a really long time. More recently, especially with the surge of COVID-19 and so many community efforts happening throughout the world, translation and community engagement have been increasingly critical. So here we're thinking about the work of scholars such as Tatiana Batova, who point us to the importance of translation and community engagement. A lot of scholars in technical and professional communication have been telling us consistently that global technical communication and translation are part of multilingual communication, but they're not everything. There's a lot more to translation than just the transformation of words from one language to the other. So processes like localization and transcreation. There are also multiple approaches in technical communication for making information accessible in multiple languages. So here I'm thinking about Godwin Egboka's work on participatory localization, where he invites community members to engage in the process of translation and localization, and Isidoro Dorpeño's localization strategies in relation to election technologies. So overall, in technical and professional communication, issues of translation have long been established, and people are complicating this idea of what a translator does. For example, Massimo Verzella, in his article on translation and technical communication, states that translators can be seen as users who are also producers of meaning, and translation an act of mediation enacted through the negotiation of meaning making. Importantly, translators can help development teams to understand what type of cultural differences are relevant for user experience design, how much language matters in design, and what adjustments are necessary to prepare digital products and documentation for localization. So translators are not just conduits of meaning, they're not just machines who transform information from one language to another, but they are also designers. They're designers of language access, as we document in this project. And so what we're doing is bringing together translation, design, and technical communication in a project about language access. One of the things we want to emphasize in framing this project is that there's a difference between language access, so providing access to information in multiple languages, and language justice. So a group called Communities Creating Healthy Environments produced this language justice toolkit, where they explain that language justice is about building and sustaining multilingual spaces in our organizations and social movements so that everyone's voice can be heard, both as an individual and as part of a diversity of communities and cultures. Valuing language justice means recognizing the social and political dimensions of language. And so we want to emphasize that although we use the term language access, we also have language justice goals, which is to help our community not just have access to information, but also be contributors, be designers, have their voices heard in how the community engages. What we will be doing in this presentation is introducing a case study called Language Access in North Central Florida. As we mentioned at the start of the presentation, we are living in Gainesville, Florida, which is a relatively rural, small city in Florida. When people think about Florida in the United States, you might think of big cities like Miami or Orlando. And of course, it would make sense that there are multiple languages constantly being used in those parts of the state. But one of the goals of this project is to make visible the fact that multilingual community members are in all parts of Florida, and that in rural parts of Florida, there are large populations of migrant farm workers and other immigrant populations who need access to information and who also want to be able to participate in the activities going on in their city. So what we did for this project is we set out to figure out, okay, what languages are spoken in this part of North Central Florida? How can we engage with multilingual community members so that we can make this a more welcoming city for everybody? what we decided to do was first conduct interviews with community members. We conducted about 45 interviews with people from different parts of the city of Gainesville and other parts of North Central Florida. And we asked people to talk about their language histories, experiences that they've had with language access issues. So has language access been provided for them in their city? Has it not? What have been the consequences of that? And rather than just producing a report or writing an article, using quotes from these interviews, with the help of Valentina and her amazing design skills, we've created collages and are working to design a museum exhibit that gives people the experience of language access. So that makes people feel, the importance of language to our participants, and that makes people feel the challenges of not being able to access information in your own language, and that makes people feel the benefits of being able to communicate in multiple languages. So the goal is to use visual metaphors and through collages specifically to showcase what language access means in this part of the state and to make it visible to multiple different audiences. So what we're going to do is share with you examples from 3 different interviews and 3 different collages that Valentina has created. The one on the left is from a participant from Saudi Arabia who speaks Arabic. The one in the middle is from a participant from Guatemala who speaks an indigenous language of Guatemala called Canjoval. And so there's the assumption that all of our immigrant populations from Latin America speak Spanish, but as we learned through participants, such as the one we will share with you shortly, many immigrants from Latin America speak indigenous languages that are not Spanish. And so there's specific cultural ties and representations that are needed when we talk about Latin American immigrants and their languages. And finally, we will introduce a participant from Haiti who speaks Haitian Creole. And Valentina will tell you a little bit more about the creation of these collages and how we use translation as something that means not just words, but also visuals and design.
So you will notice that in the 3 collages, they have in common that we are using birds, and that's the main visual metaphor that we are using. We are using birds to talk about migration. So here are the collages about Arabic language and about Canjoval, with the text next to it, the text in the original language and translated into English. And these are prototypes. These are still work in progress. We are still working on the designs and getting feedback from participants about them. So the designs are still not finalized and the translations might not be completely accurate. And what we are doing is that we are collecting quotes from the interviews and putting them next to the collage and to the written translation in both languages. And in collages, we are using, apart from the words, we are using images from the home countries of participants and also images from the new context in which they are living right now in Florida. So how can visuals help connect language and culture? This is one of the quotes from the interview. From the interviews is about Arabic language, and the person in the interview said that the Arabic language is linked to our identity, to our religion. We are Muslim, and it's a privilege to speak Arabic because you can read the Holy Book in the native language in which it was written. You understand it better than those who read the translation because you cannot translate everything. We consider it a privilege, so it is very emotionally harmful to be in a place where your language becomes your obstacle. You feel vulnerable, tied up. You feel that you don't belong here and you cannot live here. So in this quote, as you will notice, there are 2 paragraphs, and this is a structure that we identified and some guidelines that we want to keep using for future quotes that we want to use to share language experiences. And is that in the first one, this person is talking about the positive cultural or personal values that she assigns to her language. When we're talking about language access, there are many obstacles and injustices that people are experiencing, but also things that came up in the interviews is that they have very positive cultural meanings associated to their language. So that's what the first part of the quote is talking about. And in the second one, we are showing the urgency and the issue of the emotional impact in this case that this person experienced by not having language access. And in relation to language justice, this quote shows the political and social dimension that language could have, that language access could have in a person's life. She's talking about, the participant here is talking about the feeling of not belonging, of feeling excluded, and how that hurts an individual, not only on a personal level, but also in relation to her larger culture and her cultural beliefs. In the last part of the quote in Arabic, what you mentioned about being emotionally harmful is something that I wanted to portray in these collages. Here are some prototypes to show that part. So here the birds you see in most of them there are falcons, because the person who said this quote, she's from Saudi Arabia, and the falcon is the national bird from Saudi Arabia. The bird in the third collage is a hupu, which is a bird that appears in the Quran. It is the messenger of Prophet Solomon. As you remember, the quote also talks about religion. So in these three prototypes, in these three sketches, I was experimenting with different ways of showing how that bird, that person migrating, was being feeling emotionally harmed. So for example, in the first one that you see there, the falcon, it's tied up by its feet to a plant, which is a plant from native here from North Central Florida. And yeah, here I was experimenting with different ways of visually conveying that emotional aspect of the quote. With the collages, something that we are doing, as Laura was mentioning, if we see translation as an act of mediation, an act of true negotiation of meaning making, by using images to translate participants' quotes, we are opening up the possibilities to have conversations about meaning with them, conversations where we are negotiating meaning about how they want to be represented. So we are connecting visuals with language, culture, and identity. With collages, as we are using images that have cultural and personal meanings for participants, they already have meanings that they associate with these collages. We have realized that it might be easier for them to participate and to have a voice in how they want to be represented and how they want that literal written quote to be translated into visuals. So when we showed the collages in the previous slide to this person who speaks Arabic, she said that she liked the most this one that you see in this slide. She said that the falcon is one of her cultural signs. It is linked to power, generosity, and braveness. So the feathers falling is like I'm losing my power. My language is not helping me. So yeah, this image that was put here in this collage prompted a conversation about those cultural meanings that she already associated with falcons. Falcons, she mentioned, were animals that usually rich people had in Saudi Arabia. So it was especially powerful to show that falcon that is a symbol of power was losing its feathers. So yeah, like the collages are opening opportunities to negotiate meeting with them. And that might be especially important in this context of North Central Florida, where because there is no language access, because migrants sometimes they don't speak English, they sometimes I feel like they don't have a voice. They cannot participate in conversations because they don't speak English and there is no language access. So for example, one of the quotes, one of the parts of the quotes that another participant said is that he feels like mute, like he's blind. It's like I cannot see or hear anything when he's here in Florida. So using the collages and the images to prompt conversations, it might be especially important here working with people who don't speak English and working across different levels of literacy. In this is the collage about Canjoal. You see that there are some children in there, and part of the quote that we are portraying here says, "My boy already speaks 3 languages, Canjoal, Spanish, and English. At home, I only speak our dialect, Canjoal, with my son so he can continue learning and won't forget. I want him to learn it because one day it's going to be useful for him to be able to help other people." So while in the quote about Arabic, the cultural relation was more related to religion, in this one in Canjoa, what this quote demonstrates is that for indigenous language speakers, language access is also about preserving language for future generations. And that's something that it's implicit in the quote, but it's also something that we are visually showing in the collage with the 2 children there. So finally, as we are designing these collages, we're also sharing them with participants and getting feedback from them about what they think, how they want to be represented, what images they want to include, and how they want to include them. And this is a quote from the person who speaks Asian Creole when we showed her this collage. And what she said was that this, the design of the collages or the postcards, which is the format in which so far we are thinking of sharing the collages. So this is challenging the narrative about migrants, that something is wrong with your country, that your country is not good enough. That's what people assume. Are we showing the sad story removes our humanity? The message is twofold. We need language access, but our language is also part of our lives. So this quote, as we continue working on this project and continue creating more collages, this quote is helping us with explore how the visual aspects that we are including here and how this process is helping to challenge stereotypes about migrant populations, challenge misperceptions that people here in Florida might have about multilingual speakers.
So as you can see, Valentina has really brought to life the quotes, not just translating them into a different language, but translating them into visual language. And we think this has great implications for the work that technical communicators are doing in collaboration with visual designers and with translators. So we wanted to end with some questions as we keep thinking about next steps for the project. So for example, how can technical communication researchers and translators work with visual designers toward language justice? So one of the things that we found through this project is that when you write down a quote and you share it with a participant, they might give you some perspective. But when you transform that quote into a visual, like a collage, it opens up language access and kind of expands our definition of language access, because you're not just providing the information, but you're also visualizing the information and finding a different point of connection for people. When we talk about translation, we often have to think about plain language and literacy levels, and visual design helps us make language access actually more accessible and help us work toward language justice and the inclusion of multiple voices. The other question is, how do we practice methods like participatory design across languages and cultures? And I would also say across different fields, such as technical communication and visual design. Participation looked very different throughout this project. As you saw, Valentina shared some feedback that we've gotten from participants, in the interviews themselves and then throughout the design process. So how can we continue involving multilingual community members in the design of the representations of their identities and cultures? And finally, what can visual designers and translators learn from multilingual community members? So what can we learn about the way that language is connected to our culture, our identity, our bodies? How can we continue being in conversation with multilingual community members to expand our definitions of language justice and to make visible, literally visible, the challenges and the affordances of speaking multiple languages across different communities? So we're happy to answer these questions or any other questions in the Q&A.